The flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror should have signaled nothing more than a routine traffic stop. Yet when a decorated Black U.S. Marshal calmly handed over his federal badge, a small-town police officer made the single worst mistake of his entire career. What began as a blatant act of racial profiling quickly exploded into a tense, armed standoff. By the time that hour ended, the local police department found itself completely surrounded by federal agents. This is the unbelievable true story. The oppressive summer heat radiated off the pristine, tree-lined asphalt of Oak Creek, Illinois. It was the kind of affluent, meticulously manicured suburb where every lawn was cut with surgical precision. Every driveway housed a luxury vehicle, and outsiders were noticed long before they ever crossed the town line. Darius Crowe knew he stood out. He simply did not care. As a seasoned veteran of the United States Marshal Service, specifically assigned to the Great Lakes Regional Fugitive Task Force, his mind was fixed on far more important matters than the suspicious glares of neighborhood watch captains. He was driving a dark, unmarked government-issued Chevy Tahoe, tracking a solid lead on Vincent Harlan, a high-profile embezzler who had skipped out on a $3 million federal bond. Intelligence placed Harlan inside his sister's sprawling colonial estate on the north end of town, dressed in standard plain clothes, a tailored gray button-down shirt, dark tactical trousers, and a concealed Kevlar vest. Darius looked every inch the experienced federal investigator. His gold star badge was clipped securely to his belt, right next to his government-issued Glock 19. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, eyes scanning the opulent houses, when the sharp, undeniable flash of red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror. A heavy sigh escaped him. He glanced at the speedometer, 28 in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. He had not swerved. He had not run a stop sign. There was absolutely no mechanical or legal reason for the stop. But as a black man driving a tinted SUV through a predominantly white, ultra-wealthy enclave, Darius did not need to search hard for the real reason he was being pulled over. He guided the Tahoe smoothly onto the shoulder, shifted into park, rolled down all four windows, standard procedure so the approaching officer would feel safe, and placed both large hands at the 12 o'clock position on the steering wheel. He had been through this song and dance before, both in and out of uniform. The protocol never changed. Comply, identify, de-escalate. In the side mirror, he watched the patrol car's door swing open. Out stepped Officer Brody Kane, a man whose posture broadcast aggressive authority from the first step. Kane was a local patrolman, built like a fire hydrant, with a tight buzz cut and a hand resting far too close to the grip of his holstered sidearm. He approached the Tahoe not with the cautious professionalism of a public servant, but with the arrogant swagger of a predator who believed he had cornered easy prey. "Keep your hands right where I can see them," Kane barked, his voice sharp and unnecessarily loud on the quiet suburban street. He stopped just behind the B pillar, refusing to stand in the window frame, a standard tactical stance delivered with pure hostility. "My hands are on the wheel, officer," Darius answered, his voice a deep, resonant calm. He deliberately kept his tone as non-threatening as possible, burying the irritation rising in his chest. "License, registration, and proof of insurance, now," Kane demanded, leaning forward, eyes sweeping the interior with intense, unjustified suspicion. "Officer, before I reach for anything, I need to inform you that I am an armed federal agent. I am a deputy United States Marshal," Darius said, articulating every syllable with deliberate clarity. "My credentials and my badge are on my belt, right side. My wallet with my driver's license is in my left breast pocket. How would you like me to proceed?" For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to freeze. A competent officer would have registered the calm demeanor, the precise terminology. the professional courtesy. A competent officer would have asked him to slowly produce the federal credentials. Brody Kane was not listening to reason. He was listening only to his own deeply ingrained prejudices. To Kane, the black man sitting in the expensive SUV was not a federal agent. He was a threat, a liar, an anomaly that did not belong in his town. "Don't you move a damn muscle!" Kane shouted, his voice cracking with sudden irrational panic. The metallic rasp of a holster unsnapping echoed loudly in the still afternoon. In a flash, Kane had drawn his service weapon and aimed it directly at Darius's head through the driver's side window. Darius's heart rate spiked as adrenaline flooded his system. Yet his training held him perfectly still. His hands remained glued to the leather of the steering wheel. He did not flinch. He knew that any sudden movement, any flicker of frustration, could put a bullet through his skull. "Officer, lower your weapon," Darius said, his voice dropping an octave, shifting from polite citizen to commanding federal authority. "You are making a massive mistake. I am a U.S. Marshal. Call it into your dispatch. Have them run my plates. The vehicle is registered to the United States government." "Shut your mouth!" Kane screamed, his face flushing a deep mottled red. The barrel of the gun trembled slightly, betraying his lack of discipline. "There's no way you're a Fed. You're driving a stolen vehicle and you're trying to pull a fast one. Keep your hands on the wheel, or I swear to God I will drop you right here." The absurdity of the situation would have been almost comical if it were not so deadly. Darius sat inside a federal vehicle equipped with government radios, hidden lights in the grille, and a trunk full of tactical gear. Yet this Ucaldo patrolman was willing to risk murder solely on the strength of his own bigoted assumptions. "I am not moving," Darius stated coldly, eyes locked on Kane's reflection in the side mirror. "But you need to step back and call your supervisor right now, because if you pull that trigger, you will not just go to prison. The federal government will dismantle your entire department." Kane's breathing came heavy and ragged. Without taking his eyes or his gun off Darius, he keyed the microphone on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I have a suspect at gunpoint on Elm and 4th. Suspect is armed and claiming to be federal law enforcement. I need backup rolling right now. Code 3. Inside the Tahoe, Darius did the math. Code 3 meant lights and sirens. It meant every available unit in Oak Creek was about to descend on his vehicle with weapons drawn, pumped full of adrenaline fed to them by a panicked, racist cop. He knew the statistics. He knew how quickly these situations turned fatal for black men, regardless of the badges they carried or the laws they upheld. He had to seize control of the narrative before the cavalry arrived. "Officer Kane," Darius said, reading the name tag pinned to the uniform. "Listen to me very carefully. When your backup gets here, they are going to see a tense situation. You need to de-escalate. Reach into my car. Take my badge and look at it. Just look at it." "I told you to shut up," Kane spat, inching closer to the window, the gun still leveled at Darius's temple. "You think you can buy a fake badge off the internet and just wave it around to get out of a felony stop? I know your kind. You think you're smart? You're not." The words hung in the humid air, thick and toxic. It was the confirmation Darius had not needed, but had fully expected. This was never about traffic laws. It was never about stolen vehicles. It was entirely about Kane's inability to reconcile his prejudice with reality. Moments later, the wail of sirens shattered the suburban peace. 2 more Oak Creek police cruisers tore around the corner, hopping the curb before slamming into park at aggressive angles, boxing the Tahoe in. Doors flew open. Boots hit the pavement. "Hands up! Put your hands up!" yelled a second officer, a younger man named Derek Sloan, as he unholstered his weapon and took position behind his cruiser's door. "My hands are on the wheel. I am a United States Marshal. Darius projected his voice loudly and clearly, ensuring the dashboard cameras on the police cruisers captured every single word. "I am armed with my duty weapon on my right hip. My federal credentials are right next to it." "He's lying! He's got a gun!" Kane yelled back to Sloan. "Get him out of the car!" Sloan hesitated. He looked from Kane to the polished Tahoe, noting the pristine condition of the vehicle and the absolute chilling calm of the man inside it. Usually suspects facing 3 drawn guns were screaming, crying, or fighting. Darius Crowe was doing none of those things. He sat like a stone statue, projecting an aura of lethal patience. "Officer Sloan," Darius called out, reading the situation instantly. He could tell the younger cop was searching for a way to make sense of the chaos. "Run the plates on this vehicle. Run them right now. They come back to the Department of Justice. Don't listen to him, Derek. Pull him out," Kane ordered, his ego severely bruised by Darius bypassing his authority and speaking directly to the junior officer. Kane did not wait. He lunged forward, grabbed the handle of the Tahoe's door, and yanked it open. "Get out of the car. Out of the car. Right now." Knowing that resisting a panicked cop with a drawn gun was a death sentence, Darius slowly, deliberately, removed his hands from the wheel. "I am stepping out, moving slowly," he announced. He swung his legs out of the SUV and stood. At 6'3", he towered over Kane, a physical reality that only seemed to infuriate the local cop further. "Turn around. On your knees. Cross your ankles," Kane ordered, pressing the barrel of his Glock dangerously close to the base of Darius's skull. Darius gritted his teeth, swallowing the intense humiliation and rage bubbling in his throat. He slowly lowered himself to the hot asphalt, intertwining his fingers behind his head. The rough gravel dug into his knees, a sharp physical reminder of the indignity of the moment. Kane holstered his weapon, grabbed Darius's wrists with violent force, and snapped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs onto him, tightening them until the metal bit painfully into skin. Once secured, Kane began patting him down. When his hand brushed the heavy solid metal of Darius's Glock 19, Kane let out a triumphant grunt. "Got the weapon! He's armed!" he yelled, stripping the gun from the holster and tossing it into the grass. Next, his hands found the leather credential case on Darius's belt. He ripped it off roughly. "Look at the badge, Kane," Darius said, his voice deadly quiet. "Look at the seal. Look at the ID card." Kane flipped the leather case open. The heavy gold star of the U.S. Marshal Service gleamed in the sunlight, resting opposite a thick laminated federal identification card bearing Darius's photograph, fingerprints, and the signature of the director. Kane stared at it for 3 long seconds. Then, with a scoff of absolute disgust, he tossed the credentials onto the hood of the Tahoe. The leather slapped loudly against the metal. "Nice try," Kane sneered. "Looks like a cheap Halloween prop. Get him in the back of my cruiser." Sloan approached, looking at the badge on the hood. He squinted at it, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. Brody, that looks pretty real, man. The ID has holograms on it." "It's a fake, Derek. Are you blind?" Kane snapped, grabbing Darius by the bicep and hauling him roughly to his feet. "He's going downtown for impersonating a federal officer and carrying a concealed weapon." As Kane shoved him toward the back of the sweltering patrol car, Darius did not fight. He did not need to. Beneath his gray button-down, securely strapped to his chest, was a covert 2-way federal communication radio. As Kane forcefully slammed his chest against the cruiser to pat him down a second time, Darius subtly leaned his body weight into the roof pillar, pressing the hidden emergency transmit button 3 times in rapid succession. It was the Marshal's panic signal. Dozens of miles away at the federal building in downtown Chicago, the operations center alarms began to scream. Supervisory Inspector Harlan Voss looked at the tracking monitor on the massive screen at the front of the room. Darius Crow's beacon was flashing a brilliant, angry red. "Crow just hit his panic button in Oak Creek," Voss barked, grabbing his tactical vest off the back of his chair. "He's off the grid. Get the tactical response team. Get the FBI field office on the horn. We have a federal agent in distress." Back in Oak Creek, Brody Kane slammed the door of his cruiser shut, locking the U.S. Marshal in the cage. He smirked at Sloan, entirely unaware that he had just declared war on the United States government. The back seat of the Oak Creek police cruiser was a suffocating plastic cage. With the engine idling, the air conditioning struggled to penetrate the thick, bullet-resistant partition. Darius sat perfectly rigid, his broad shoulders cramped against the hard synthetic seating. The heavy steel handcuffs dug relentlessly into his wrists with every breath. Sweat beaded on his forehead and rolled down the sides of his face, yet his expression remained a mask of absolute, chilling composure. Outside the vehicle, Kane was parading around the unmarked federal Tahoe like a hunter who had just bagged a prized buck. He shined his flashlight into the tinted windows, ignoring the blazing afternoon sun, trying to find more evidence to justify his catastrophic mistake. "Look at this setup," Kane barked, gesturing to the complex radio array and the reinforced steel lockbox bolted to the floor of the Tahoe's trunk. "This guy went all out. He's probably running a highly sophisticated cartel operation. Stolen government plates, counterfeit IDs, the works. The chief is going to pin a medal on my chest for this one." Officer Derek Sloan stood a few feet away, arms crossed over his chest, looking physically ill. He kept glancing nervously between the pristine gold star badge sitting neglected on the Tahoe's hood and the stoic, imposing figure handcuffed in the back of Kane's cruiser. His gut, honed by years on the force, was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. Criminals caught in a lie panicked. They begged, they bargained, or they fought. Darius Crow was doing absolutely nothing, and that terrifying stillness felt less like defeat and more like a countdown. "Brody, I don't know," Sloan said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I just ran the VIN through the National Crime Information Center on my mobile terminal. The system threw up a restricted block. It literally says, 'Property of the United States Federal Government. Contact Homeland Security/DOJ for inquiries.' It doesn't say stolen, Brody. It says restricted." Kane waved his hand dismissively, completely blinded by his own arrogance and deep-seated prejudices. "Hackers, Derek. These guys are sophisticated now. They probably breached the local DMV registry and scrambled the VIN data. Don't be so naive. You think a guy who looks like that is running a federal fugitive task force? Wake up." While Kane basked in his delusional victory, the atmosphere in downtown Chicago was a completely different kind of chaos. Supervisory Inspector Harlan Voss stood at the center of the Great Lakes Regional Fugitive Task Force operations floor. The room, usually a hub of calculated, quiet intelligence gathering, had erupted into a synchronized frenzy the moment Darius's panic signal tripped. Federal agents do not press the panic button unless they are completely compromised, facing imminent death, or taken hostage. For a seasoned operator like Darius Crow to use it, the situation had to be catastrophic. "I want eyes on his beacon right now," Voss bellowed, his voice cutting through the din of ringing telephones and shouting analysts. "Where is he?" "Signal is stationary, boss," a senior intelligence analyst shouted back, furiously typing at a command console. "Coordinates put him in Oak Creek, Illinois, right on the corner of Elm and 4th. He's been holding at that location for several minutes. Did he call in a traffic stop? Did he initiate a pursuit?" Voss demanded, strapping his heavy ballistic vest over his shirt and checking the loaded magazine of his rifle. "Negative. No radio traffic prior to the panic signal. But sir..." The analyst paused, eyes widening at the data scrolling across his second monitor. I just got a ping from the NCIC database. Oak Creek local police just ran the VIN on Crow's Tahoe. Voss's blood ran cold. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Crow had not been ambushed by the cartel or cornered by the fugitive they were tracking. He had been intercepted by local law enforcement. And if a veteran federal marshal had hit his panic button during a local police stop, it meant the local police had gone completely off the rails. "Get the FBI field office special agent in charge on the line," Voss ordered, his tone shifting from frantic to lethally precise. "Tell him one of our deputies is currently being held hostage under color of law by the Oak Creek Police Department. I am mobilizing the entire tactical response team. Every available badge in this building is rolling out." "Should I try to call the local Oak Creek dispatch?" the analyst asked. "No," Voss replied, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. They had their chance to run his badge. If they have him at gunpoint, a phone call is just going to give some panicked local cop an excuse to pull the trigger because he thinks we're a threat. We don't call. We show up. Within moments, the underground parking garage of the Chicago Federal Building echoed with the roar of dozens of high-performance engines. A massive convoy of black up-armored SUVs and tactical transport vans tore out onto the city streets, their hidden emergency lights strobing violently. Sirens wailed, parting the dense city traffic like the Red Sea. They were a heavily armed, highly trained wave of federal authority, and their sole objective was Oak Creek. Back in the stifling heat of the suburb, Sergeant Fletcher Grady arrived on the scene. Grady was a longtime veteran of the Oak Creek force, a man who preferred writing parking tickets and handling noise complaints over actual police work. He lumbered out of his supervisor's SUV, wiping sweat from his brow, taking in the scene. "What do we have, Kane?" Grady asked, adjusting his gun belt. "Caught a live one, Sarge." Kane grinned proudly. "Impersonating a federal agent, carrying a concealed firearm. Fake badge, fake IDs, the whole 9 yards. I've got him secured in the back of my unit." Grady walked over to the Tahoe and picked up the leather credential case Kane had casually discarded on the hood. He flipped it open. The heavy gold star caught the light. Grady ran his thumb over the intricate, deeply engraved lettering. He looked at the ID card, tilting it to see the multi-layered holographic federal seal, a security feature nearly impossible to replicate perfectly. A heavy pit formed in Sergeant Grady's stomach. He swallowed hard. "Kane, did you call the federal hotline to verify these credential numbers?" "Didn't need to, Sarge. It's obviously a fake," Kane scoffed, though a tiny sliver of doubt finally managed to pierce his thick skull upon seeing his sergeant's pale face. "Take him to the station," Grady ordered, his voice suddenly urgent. "Do not say another word to him. Do not question him. I am going back to the precinct to make some phone calls. If you are wrong about this, Kane, God help us all." The Oak Creek Police Department was a modest single-story brick building nestled between a quaint local bakery and a community park. It was a department accustomed to handling minor vandalism, lost pets, and the occasional dispute over property lines. It was entirely unequipped for the wrath of the United States Department of Justice. Brody Kane swaggered through the back doors of the precinct, practically dragging Darius Crow by the chain of his handcuffs. Despite the brutal treatment, Darius maintained absolute silence. He had not uttered a single syllable since Kane had tossed his badge onto the hood of the SUV. He knew his silence was infuriating the racist patrolman, and he was letting Kane dig his own grave as deep as he possibly could. "Get in there." Kane shoved Darius into a small, windowless holding cell at the end of the booking hallway, slamming the heavy steel door shut with a resounding clang. He did not uncuff him. He did not read him his Miranda rights. He simply locked the black federal agent in a cage like an animal and walked back to the bullpen to start drafting his arrest report. eager to enshrine his heroic actions on paper. In the chief's office, Sergeant Fletcher Grady was sweating profusely. He was gripping the receiver of his desk phone, listening to the hold music of the FBI's regional verification hotline. Across the room, Chief Roland Ames, a man entirely too close to retirement to deal with a crisis, was pacing a hole into the carpet. "Are you telling me," Chief Ames hissed, "that Kane locked up a man claiming to be a U.S. Marshal without verifying the credentials first?" "He says it's a fake, Chief," Grady stammered. "But the badge, it felt real, it felt heavy, and the VIN on his vehicle came back restricted." Before the chief could respond, the hold music on Grady's phone abruptly cut off. A stern, cold voice came over the line. "Oak Creek Police Department. This is Special Agent Quentin Hale, FBI Chicago Field Office. To whom am I speaking?" This is Sergeant Fletcher Grady, sir," Grady replied, his throat dry. "I'm calling to verify a credential number for a suspect we currently have in custody." There was a chilling silence on the other end of the line. When Special Agent Hale finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "Sergeant Grady, you do not have a suspect in custody. You have unlawfully detained and kidnapped Deputy United States Marshal Darius Crowe. You have disarmed a federal agent. You have assaulted a federal agent. I am instructing you to immediately release him, return his weapon, and surrender yourselves." "Kidnapped!" Grady choked out, the color completely draining from his face. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. Officer Kane thought—" "I don't care what your officer thought," Hale interrupted, his tone laced with venom. "Look out your window, Sergeant." Grady slowly lowered the phone and walked over to the blinds of the chief's office, pulling them apart with trembling fingers. Chief Ames stepped up beside him. The quiet suburban street outside the police station was gone. In its place was a scene straight out of a military occupation. A fleet of at least 15 unmarked black SUVs had completely swarmed the building, blocking both ends of the street and sealing off the precinct's parking lot. The deep, rhythmic thumping of a federal surveillance helicopter vibrated the glass panes of the windows. Before Grady could even process the sheer volume of vehicles, the doors of the SUVs flew open in perfect unison. Over 50 heavily armed federal agents poured out into the afternoon heat. These were not beat cops in short-sleeved polyester. They were operators clad in heavy green and black tactical gear, Kevlar helmets, and carrying short-barreled automatic rifles. Emblazoned across their chests and backs in massive, bold yellow letters were the acronyms of their respective agencies. U.S. Marshals, FBI, ATF. "Oh my God," Chief Ames whispered, his knees actually buckling slightly. "They brought an army." Leading the charge was Supervisory Inspector Harlan Voss. He did not knock. He did not wait for permission. Voss kicked open the front glass doors of the Oak Creek Police Department with enough force to shatter the hinges. Behind him, a tidal wave of tactical agents flooded the small lobby, their rifles raised and perfectly leveled. "Federal agents, nobody move!" Voss roared, his voice echoing off the linoleum floors. "Keep your hands away from your weapons. Step away from your desks." The desk sergeant at the front reception window froze, hands shooting straight up into the air. In the bullpen, Brody Kane dropped his pen, staring in absolute paralyzed horror as laser sights painted the walls of his precious precinct. "Where is he?" Voss demanded, storming into the bullpen, flanked by 4 SWAT operators who immediately began securing the local officers, stripping them of their duty belts. Kane could not speak. His throat had completely closed up. The arrogant smirk that had plastered his face for the last hour had been entirely wiped away, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a man realizing he had just ruined his own life. "I said, where is my marshal?" Voss yelled, grabbing Kane by the collar of his uniform and slamming him hard against a filing cabinet. The metallic crash echoed through the silent room. "Holding cell. Kane stuttered, barely able to breathe. Back hallway. Voss shoved Kane away in disgust, letting two heavily armed FBI agents immediately tackle the patrolman to the floor, aggressively wrenching his arms behind his back to apply federal handcuffs. "Get the chief out here now," Voss ordered one of his men, as he sprinted down the narrow hallway toward the holding cells. He reached the heavy steel door, drawing his own sidearm. "Keys! Somebody get me the damn keys!" A trembling Sergeant Grady scurried out of the chief's office, holding out a large brass keyring, like a peace offering to a conquering general. Here are the keys. No. I swear to God, we didn't know. Voss snatched the keys, jammed the largest one into the lock, and threw the heavy door open. Inside the dim cell, Darius Crowe was still sitting calmly on the metal bench, his hands tightly bound behind his back. He looked up at his supervisor, a slow, grim smile finally spreading across his face. "Took you guys long enough, Harlan," Darius said casually, as if they were meeting for coffee rather than at the center of an armed federal standoff. "Are you injured, Darius?" Voss asked, his tone instantly shifting from enraged commander to deeply concerned brother-in-arms, stepping forward to unlock the cuffs. "Just my pride," Darius replied, rubbing his bruised wrists as the heavy steel bracelets finally fell away. "And my schedule. We still have a fugitive to catch today, don't we?" Voss chuckled darkly, pulling Darius into a brief, firm embrace. "Yeah, we do. But first, I think we have a local police department to dismantle." Darius Crowe stepped out of the claustrophobic holding cell, his boots clicking heavily against the scuffed linoleum floor of the precinct's back hallway. He rolled his shoulders, the tension of the last hour finally bleeding out of his muscles, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. Beside him, Supervisory Inspector Harlan Voss flanked him like a heavily armed shadow, his hand resting on the grip of his slung rifle. As they formed into the main bullpen, the scale of the federal takeover became glaringly apparent. The Oak Creek Police Department had been entirely neutralized. Local officers, completely stripped of their duty belts, radios, and weapons, were seated on the floor with their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Over 24 tactical agents from the FBI and the Marshal Service stood over them. Absolute silence dominated the room, save for the crackle of federal encrypted communications. Chief Roland Ames was pressed against the corner of his own office, sweating profusely as FBI Special Agent Quentin Hale dictated instructions to a team of cybercrime evidence technicians. "I want the servers isolated," Hale commanded, pointing to the server closet behind the dispatch desk. "Pull the hard drives on every dash cam, body cam, and precinct security camera. Secure the radio dispatch logs. Nobody touches a keyboard in this building without my explicit authorization. If I find out a single kilobyte of data has been deleted, I will charge the entire IT department with obstruction of justice." Darius's eyes swept the room until they landed on the architect of this disaster. Officer Brody Kane was no longer the swaggering, arrogant predator who had drawn a weapon on a federal agent over a traffic stop. He was sitting on the floor near the water cooler, his face buried in his chest, trembling violently. Heavy federal handcuffs pinned his wrists together. Walking slowly, deliberately, Darius approached Kane. The bullpen grew dead silent as the towering U.S. Marshal stood over the disgraced local cop. "Look at me," Darius said, his voice quiet, but carrying the undeniable weight of absolute authority. Kane did not move. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, tears of pure terror and self-pity leaking down his flushed cheeks. "I said look at me, Kane," Darius repeated, his tone dropping to a dangerous, uncompromising register. Slowly, Kane raised his head. The arrogance in his eyes had been completely extinguished, replaced by the hollow, desperate look of a man who realized he was staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence. "You thought you had it all figured out, didn't you?" Darius asked, crouching down slightly to meet Kane eye to eye. You saw a black man driving a nice car in your town, and your brain couldn't process it. You couldn't fathom that I held a higher clearance, a higher rank, and a higher moral standard than you ever will. You were so blinded by your own hatred that you ignored my badge, ignored my credentials, and ignored your own dispatch protocols. I made a mistake, Kane whispered, his voice cracking pitifully. I thought it was a fake. I was just doing my job. Your job is to uphold the law, not your personal prejudices, Darius shot back, his voice hardening into steel. You drew a loaded weapon and pressed it to the head of a federal agent. You unlawfully restrained me. You kidnapped me under color of law. That is a violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. Do you know what the penalty is for that, Kane? It's 10 years in federal prison. And that's before the DOJ tax on the firearms charges. Across the room, Chief Ames desperately tried to salvage whatever was left of his career. Inspector Voss, Agent Hale, listen to me. The chief pleaded, hands held up defensively. This is an isolated incident. Kane is a rogue officer. He acted entirely outside of departmental policy. You have my full cooperation to prosecute him, but there is no need to shut down my entire precinct. Voss turned slowly, leveling a glare at the chief that could freeze boiling water. An isolated incident, Chief Ames? When my deputy told your officer to run his plates, your officer refused. When your younger patrolman Sloan ran the VIN and told Kane the vehicle belonged to the federal government, Kane ignored him. And when your own sergeant held a United States Marshal's badge in his hand, he didn't immediately release the prisoner. He brought him here and locked him in a cage. Voss stepped closer to the chief, invading his personal space. This isn't a rogue officer, Ames. This is a systemic, catastrophic failure of leadership and training. You bred this culture. You allowed this arrogance to fester. And now the Department of Justice is going to burn it to the ground. Agent Hale stepped forward, holding a thick sheaf of legal documents he had just pulled from a portable printer in his command SUV. Chief Ames, I have here a federal injunction signed by a United States District Judge. The Oak Creek Police Department is hereby under the operational control of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, pending a comprehensive civil rights probe. We are auditing every single arrest officer Kane has made, and we are auditing every complaint of racial profiling your office has buried. Ames slumped against the wall, all the air rushing out of his lungs. His career was over. His department was effectively dissolved. Darius stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his gray button-down shirt. An FBI evidence technician approached him, holding a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside it rested Darius's Glock 19 and his Gold Star badge. Your property, Deputy Marshal, the technician said respectfully, unsealing the bag and handing the items over. Darius clipped his weapon back onto his right hip. He took the leather credential case, opening it to look at the Gold Star. It was heavy, a symbol of the immense trust placed in him by his country. He clipped it securely to his belt, right where it belonged. Are we done here, Harlan? Darius asked. Looking over at Voss. The FBI has the precinct, Voss confirmed, racking the bolt of his rifle to clear the chamber before slinging it over his back. What do you want to do with him? He nodded toward Kane. Process him, Darius said coldly, not sparing the weeping patrolman another glance. Throw him in the back of a transport van. Let him see what the inside of a federal lockup looks like. We have actual work to do. The air outside the Oak Creek police station was thick with exhaust from the idling federal vehicles and the frantic murmurs of a rapidly gathering crowd. Local news vans were already screeching to a halt at the perimeter, their satellite masts extending into the sky, tipped off by the massive mobilization of federal assets. Neighbors who usually kept entirely to themselves were standing on their manicured lawns, watching in stunned silence as heavily armed tactical agents stood guard outside their local precinct. As Darius Crow and Harlan Voss pushed through the shattered front doors, they were met by FBI Special Agent Quentin Hale, who was briskly walking up the precinct steps. Hale's expression was grim. His eyes locked onto a worn black leather-bound notebook and several clear plastic evidence bags he held tightly in his left hand. "Inspector Voss, Deputy Crow, hold up a second," Hale called out, pulling them aside near the command SUV. "What did you find, Quentin?" Voss asked, noticing the severe set of the FBI agent's jaw. "We just tossed Kane's patrol car and his personal locker," Hale explained, holding up the plastic bags. Inside were several small, unmarked glassine envelopes containing a white, powdery substance alongside a rusted, unregistered snub-nose revolver with the serial number aggressively filed off. "Drop pieces. Planted evidence." Darius's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing at the bags. "He's been setting people up. It gets worse," Hale said, tapping the black notebook. "This is Kane's personal log. We haven't fully processed it yet, but a quick scan shows he's been keeping detailed, off-the-books records of traffic stops, specific demographic targeting. He's been systematically pulling over minority drivers passing through Oak Creek, running illegal searches, and planting narcotics or weapons if they didn't have enough cash for a roadside settlement." The revelation sent a fresh wave of disgust crashing over Darius. What had initially seemed like a spontaneous act of bigoted stupidity was actually the tip of a deeply entrenched, malicious iceberg. Kane was not just an arrogant racist. He was an organized predator who used his badge as a shield to terrorize innocent citizens. And he had been doing it with total impunity, protected by the wealthy, indifferent bubble of Oak Creek. "He shook down the wrong guy today," Voss growled, staring back at the precinct doors. "The DOJ Civil Rights Division is going to have a field day with this. Every single conviction tied to Kane is going to be overturned. The lawsuits alone will bankrupt this city. The mayor is already on his way down here, completely panicked," Hale added, tucking the evidence back into a secure lockbox in the SUV. "But the FBI is handling the fallout. You marshals have a fugitive to catch, don't you?" Darius checked his tactical watch. They had lost precious time dealing with Kane's delusions. Vincent Harlan, the $3 million embezzler, was still sitting comfortably in his sister's sprawling estate less than 3 miles away, entirely unaware that a federal storm had just descended on his quiet hideout. "We do," Darius said, his voice returning to the crisp, professional cadence of a hunt. He turned to Voss. "Is the perimeter team still in position at the Harlan residence?" "They never left," Voss confirmed, pulling up a tactical map on his ruggedized tablet. "We have 4 unmarked units maintaining visual on all exits. No movement in or out since you got intercepted. The target is still in the box." "Good," Darius said, the fire returning to his eyes. He walked over to his Tahoe, which had been recovered and brought to the precinct by another agent. He popped the trunk, unlocking the reinforced steel lockbox. He pulled out a heavy black tactical vest adorned with the bold yellow U.S. Marshal lettering, slipping it over his head and tightening the side straps. He grabbed his M4 carbine, slammed a 30-round magazine into the magwell, and chambered a round with a sharp metallic clack. This was his element. This was the job he had sworn an oath to do. "Listen up," Voss shouted, rallying the dozen deputy marshals who had remained outside the precinct. "The FBI has the local mess contained. We are pivoting back to primary objective. Target is Vincent Harlan, wanted for massive federal wire fraud and bond jumping. He is considered a flight risk, but not historically violent. However, given the delay, we execute him at a hard breach, no chances." Within minutes, the marshals were mounted up. A convoy of 6 black SUVs detached from the massive federal presence at the precinct and tore through the pristine streets of Oak Creek. There were no sirens this time. They moved with silent, lethal precision, winding through the suburban roads until they reached the affluent north end of town. The target residence was a massive 3-story colonial house set back from the road by a sweeping circular driveway. The moment the SUVs breached the driveway, the tactical ballet began. Darius was out of his vehicle before it even came to a complete stop, his boots hitting the gravel as he sprinted toward the massive oak front doors. Behind him, a team of marshals fanned out, securing the perimeter, covering the windows, and locking down the backyard. "Marshals, open the door!" Darius bellowed, his voice booming like thunder across the manicured lawn. He did not wait for a polite response. He nodded to a burly deputy carrying a heavy steel battering ram. With one synchronized swing, the ram smashed into the lock mechanism. The heavy oak doors splintered and flew open, crashing against the interior walls. "Federal agents, get down! Show me your hands!" Darius yelled, breaching the threshold with his rifle raised, sweeping the grand foyer. The contrast between this raid and Kane's traffic stop was stark. There was no panic, no screaming, no reckless waving of weapons. Every movement the marshals made was calculated, disciplined, and overwhelmingly dominant. They moved through the lavishly decorated rooms like a tidal wave, clearing the kitchen, the living room, and the sweeping staircases in a matter of seconds, or of tours. "Movement upstairs, master bedroom," a deputy called out from the second-floor landing. Darius took the stairs 2 at a time, his weapon trained upward. He rounded the corner into the master suite to find Vincent Harlan, a balding man in an expensive silk bathrobe, desperately trying to shove stacks of $100 bills and a passport into a leather duffel bag. Harlan froze, dropping the money as the red dot of Darius's laser sight painted the center of his chest. "Vincent Harlan," Darius said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion, a stark reminder of what true professional law enforcement looked like. "You missed your court date." Harlan slowly raised his hands, his face pale with defeat. He did not argue. He did not fight. He knew exactly who was standing in front of him. As Darius holstered his rifle and stepped forward to secure the fugitive in federal cuffs, he felt a profound sense of closure. The day had started with a profound insult to his identity and his profession, orchestrated by a man who fundamentally misunderstood what power actually was. But here, in this moment, doing the job he was meant to do, Darius Crowe proved exactly who he was. He was a United States Marshal, and no ignorant badge in a small town could ever take that away. Vincent Harlan was marched out of the sprawling colonial estate in heavy federal leg irons and handcuffs, his expensive silk bathrobe replaced by a hastily thrown-on tracksuit. As Darius Crowe and his team escorted the fugitive down the sweeping circular driveway, the flashing lights of the media vans illuminated the manicured lawns. Word had spread rapidly through the affluent enclave of Oak Creek. The wealthy residents who had spent the afternoon peering through their plantation blinds at the unprecedented federal occupation of their local police department were now witnessing the culmination of a massive, legitimate federal manhunt in their own backyards. The contrast was poetic and undeniable. While Officer Brody Kane had wasted his authority harassing a decorated federal agent based on the color of his skin, Darius Crowe was systematically removing a $3 million predator from their neighborhood. The cameras captured every moment, the stoic, towering presence of the Black U.S. Marshal and the defeated slump of the wealthy white-collar criminal he had just apprehended. The immediate aftermath of the Oak Creek incident triggered a seismic shockwave through the Illinois law enforcement community. The United States Department of Justice did not issue warnings. They brought the hammer down with devastating precision. Shortly afterward, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially seized all operational control of the Oak Creek Police Department. The tiny suburban force was entirely dissolved as an independent entity pending a massive civil rights probe. The investigation, spearheaded by FBI Special Agent Quentin Hale, and aggressive United States Attorney Silas Brennan uncovered a horrifying labyrinth of corruption. The black leather notebook pulled from Kane's locker became the cornerstone of a sprawling federal indictment. It detailed over 80 instances of racial profiling, illegal searches, and falsified arrest reports spanning several years. Officer Derek Sloan, thoroughly shaken by the ordeal and realizing the catastrophic trajectory of his department, immediately turned state's witness. In a series of grueling depositions, Sloan testified that the toxic culture was not merely tolerated, but actively encouraged by the department's leadership. Chief Roland Ames was forced into an immediate, disgraceful retirement, eventually pleading guilty to federal charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to violate civil rights. He would spend the twilight of his life wearing a federal tracking monitor, his pension completely stripped away. But the true reckoning belonged to Brody Kane. Sometime later, the Dirksen Federal Courthouse in downtown Chicago was packed to absolute capacity. Darius Crowe sat in the front row of the gallery, dressed in a sharp, immaculate navy blue suit, his gold star badge resting heavily in his breast pocket. Beside him sat Supervisory Inspector Harlan Voss. Both men projected a unified wall of federal authority. The heavy oak doors at the side of the courtroom swung open, and two United States Marshals, Darius's own colleagues, escorted Brody Kane into the room. The former patrolman was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, hyper-aggressive swagger was gone, replaced by the frail, trembling posture of a broken man. He wore a shapeless bright orange federal prison jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles bound in heavy chains that clinked loudly against the polished mahogany floor. United States District Judge Elias Croft presided over the sentencing. Croft, a notoriously strict jurist with zero tolerance for police misconduct, looked down at Kane from the elevated bench with unmasked disgust. "Brody Kane," Judge Croft's voice boomed through the silent courtroom. "You were given a badge and a gun to protect the public. Instead, you weaponized that authority to terrorize citizens based entirely on your own vile, deeply ingrained prejudices. You operated under the delusion that your uniform granted you immunity from the law and that your bigotry could be hidden behind the color of authority." Kane stood at the defense table, his head bowed, openly weeping. He had tried to offer a written apology to Darius earlier in the proceedings, a pathetic attempt to secure a lighter sentence, which Darius had stoically ignored. "Your actions that afternoon were not a mistake. They were the arrogant culmination of a career built on systemic abuse," Judge Croft continued, his gavel resting heavily in his hand. "You drew a loaded firearm on a United States Marshal. You illegally detained him, and the evidence proves you intended to frame him, just as you have framed dozens of innocent minority drivers before him. You are a disgrace to the badge, a danger to society, and an absolute affront to the United States Constitution." Judge Croft adjusted his glasses, his eyes locking onto the trembling former officer. "On the charges of deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and evidence tampering, I sentence you to 180 months, 15 years, in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole." The strike of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. Kane collapsed into his chair, sobbing uncontrollably as the marshals pulled him to his feet to begin his long, miserable journey into the federal prison system. Darius stood up from the gallery, adjusting his suit jacket. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. There was no joy in watching a man destroy his own life. But there was a profound sense of righteousness in the administration of absolute justice. He walked out of the courtroom, the heavy mahogany doors swinging shut behind him, leaving the disgraced ghost of Brody Kane in the past. Stepping out onto the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, the crisp winter wind hit Darius's face. Voss clapped him firmly on the shoulder. "It's finally over, Darius. Justice it was servituous." Voss said quietly. "It is," Darius agreed, looking down at the heavy gold star in his hand. He ran his thumb over the intricate federal seal, feeling the immense weight and responsibility it represented. He had faced down the darkest, most corrupt corners of law enforcement, and he had won, not by stooping to Kane's level, but by standing tall as the epitome of the law he swore to uphold. He clipped the badge back onto his belt, letting his suit jacket fall over it. "Come on, Harlan. We have a new warrant to serve on the South Side. Let's get to work." The terrifying standoff in Oak Creek proves that ultimate authority does not come from a loud voice or a drawn weapon. It comes from the truth. Darius Crowe faced down blatant racism and systemic corruption with ice-cold professionalism, ultimately watching his oppressor trade a police uniform for a federal prison jumpsuit. It is a stark reminder that nobody is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it. If this unbelievable story of true justice and federal retribution kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Let us know in the comments. Do you think 15 years was enough for what Kane did?